Today is a glorious May 14th, 2021. I'm currently at Steamtown in Scranton, Pennsylvania, the birthplace of presidents. Steamtown is a National Historic Site. I'm going to take you on a tour of what kind of equipment you can see around this location, including some Delaware Lackawanna equipment in the yard. Here we're looking at Nickel Plate 759. It was owned by the High Iron Corporation at one time, and Ross Rowland used to engineer that locomotive on various trips in the 70s on the Erie Lackawanna, Western Maryland, Pennsylvania Railroad. Extremely popular locomotive. Had a beautiful whistle, and the thing was quite powerful and fast. You can get a better view of this locomotive here. I rode behind him twice, once in 1971 on a Hoboken to Binghamton turn, outbound by the old Erie and back on the old Lackawanna. It was a great trip, sold out crowd. I also rode on a round trip from Hoboken to Scranton, where he powered a long train of Stillwell coaches to and from Scranton in July of '73. It was an ill-fated trip. He conked out climbing Pocono grade out of Stroudsburg, and they had to get a couple of Erie Lackawanna Jeeps to rescue him, get him over the grade and bring him into Scranton. This is an Illinois Central 280. There's some numerous locomotives around and on the turntable. This Illinois Central locomotive, I've never heard it, but I've heard recordings of Illinois Central locomotives, and a lot of them had nice deep-throated steamboat type whistles on them. I don't know if this was one of them. This engine here, Grand Trunk Western 6039, is a 482 mountain type. Grand Trunk Western used them on passenger trains. They use them on commuter trains out of Detroit also. Very fast engines. I had recordings of those locomotives. I have sister engine 6037 and 6040 on a CD I have at home, and those things moved. They had beautiful deep-throated whistles on them. I'm a real whistle nut. I like good music on whistles and air horns, and these Grand Trunk units were worthy of raising a lot of eyebrows. There were no-nonsense engines on passenger trains and commuter rail for the Grand Trunk Western. This is an 040, like a Little Joe from New Hampshire Trap Rock Company. Not exactly a big boy type, but I had a model railroad engine on my layout that was like this. Always used to derail, remember that? But we always called it Little Joe. It's an 040 saddle tanker. This engine here is an 060. From E.J. Levino and Company, or wherever that is. A little more powerful than an 040. Oh, here we have some rolling stock. I've seen a lot of these back in the early 70s. Erie Lackawanna cabooses. Used to rail fan the old Erie main line in places like Hohokus and Warwick, Suffern, New Jersey, and Port Jervis, and see a lot of these things. And Erie Lackawanna was a great railroad. Run by great people. They were great for customers, great for rail fans. They ran a lot of excursions for rail fans. I mean, they were just living up to their slogan, the friendly service route. And friendly they were indeed. There's a Lackawanna coal car. Probably carried a lot of anthracite too. This area was Anthracite Company. It's a hard coal. There were seams of this, limitless seams of this, underneath this city and other cities and communities around the area. Here's a Lackawanna Railroad caboose, one of the component railroads of the Erie Lackawanna, the other being the Erie. I've seen a number of these cabooses in Erie Lackawanna colors, but this is an original Lackawanna caboose, painted as it was when it was built. Here's 1901. Looks like it's an old Lehigh Valley SW1. Ancient diesels. They were built like in 1940, early 1940s. Lived a good, useful life. Well, then that's generally true of General Motors locomotives. They're built to last. And this engine here is old Lackawanna 426, built by General Motors, built in 1935. And it's been returned to Scranton recently, and it's still in operating condition. This Lackawanna car, which was used as a coach for the Steamtown excursions, which they haven't run in a while due to the pandemic. I hope they start running them this summer since things are opening up again. But this used to be a trailer that connected to an MU car. The Lackawanna MUs always ran with a power car and a trailer, and this was one of the trailer types they operated with. The other type were the open vestibule Wyatt Earp cars. Well, here we have a couple of Reading Company FP7s. These were passenger engines. They used to operate on the Reading commuter trains, long distance train or longer distance trains. Used to operate on trains like the King Cole and the Queen of the Valley. Used to run trains up to Pottsville and Bethlehem, even Jersey City. In later years, they would take two of these. They might have been these exact two. They would have one on each end, and they'd operate a push-pull commuter train between Reading Terminal, Philadelphia, and Reading, Pennsylvania. It was like a rush hour turn, originating in Reading and returning late in the evening back to Reading from Philadelphia. They run on occasional fan trips, but not lately. But they're very popular, very colorful locomotives. Now this baby is Reading Company T1 484, number 2124. I've heard many recordings of this engine operating in freight service and in Iron Horse Ramble services. Those were passenger excursions that they ran like the late 50s, early 60s. They used to haul long passenger trains all across the Reading Company system, and they were jam-packed with people. They would run with like 20 cars, 22 cars, sometimes a double head with another T1 like the 2100 or the 2102. And this particular engine, the 2124, I have lots of recordings of. It had a nice multi-chimed melodious passenger whistle on it. And these things could really move. There's a recording I have of this engine going through the cut at North Wales, Pennsylvania. And he was flying and going through that cut. It sounded like a B-52 taking off. It was loud. These are great engines. In fact, they're trying to restore the 2100 and the 2102. The 2102 used to operate on Conrail, I recall, back in the 80s. He used to operate on a defunct tourist line, the Blue Mountain in Reading, between Temple and South Hamburg. It was a sight to see them running 60 miles an hour on that track, which was pretty good shape. 2102 had a freight whistle, a shrill single chime freight whistle, as did the 2100. But they did have their version of a passenger whistle, which was definitely Reading sounding when you heard it. In fact, Strasburg Railroad's 210 number 90 has a Reading passenger whistle built on it. Well, here's Rahway Valley number 15. It's a 280. I believe this engine used to operate excursions in Steamtown when it was in Vermont. Steamtown moved here in the 1980s from Vermont. And this is a Brill Bullet Car. These cars were used on the Red Arrow lines, the high-speed line between 69th Street, Upper Darby, Pennsylvania, and Norristown. They were built in 1931. Brill constructed a lot of electrified rail vehicles in the Philadelphia area. What comes to mind are the Broad Street subway cars that stormed that line under the ground between the 1930s and around the early 1980s. Brill cars were fun. They had loud traction motors, and I've ridden on a few of these particular bullets on the high-speed line to Norristown. With the windows open, flying down the track, it was third rail, high-level platform service only. Those traction motors wailing made a hell of a nice sound with the clickety-clack on the jointed rail. They were a fun car to ride on. And this is the pride and joy here at Steamtown. This locomotive was recently cosmetically restored and is put back out for display. The UP Big Boy, number 4012, 4884. It looks like it's ready to run tomorrow, but sadly it's just standing here, but it looks awfully impressive. A lot of people stop and look at it. Can't help but be awed by the huge locomotive. It's just hard to believe that one of these is in service, number 4014. In fact, they're planning on putting the 4014 out in service starting in August. For those of you who have never heard of Big Boy in operation, well, some of you may have heard the 4014 in operation lately. I want to just tell you that what that Big Boy sounds like is what all the other Big Boys sounded like. Awesome power, loud double exhaust. They all had deep-throated steamboat type whistles. When you heard those whistles, they meant business. They took no prisoners. These things were deceptively quick. They could travel about 70 miles an hour, and they often did. They toiled mostly on Sherman Hill, west out of Cheyenne. And one book I strongly recommend, although it's kind of hard to get as it's been out of print for a while, is Darwin's History of the Union Pacific at Cheyenne. It's a huge book. When it first came out, it was like $100. But I managed to get it through a book dealer from someone who sold it. And let me tell you something, the photographs in that book of big boys and other steam engines like the Challengers and the 484s being serviced in Cheyenne. It's the Cecil B. DeMille book of railroads. And Cecil B. DeMille wrote a movie called The Union Pacific. And that book is definitely worth getting if you can find it. It's a proud book to have in your rail book collection. I have recordings of the big boys that people like Stan Kistler and others have made. And I always have to turn the volume down on the speakers when they're pulling a load, especially at speed. And those whistles, they just send chills up and down your back. All the big UP engines, whether the big boys, the Challengers, or the 800s, they all had those deep-throated steamboat whistles. Intimidating and awesome to hear. This is Delaware Lackawanna 2409, looks like a C424. It's built in 1966, originally served on the N&W and of course the Wabash, and it was painted up in a Wabash heritage scheme. Here's Delaware Lackawanna number 3007. It's an M630 built in 1970, once served on the British Columbia Railroad and before that the Pacific Great Eastern. Here's Delaware Lackawanna 3000, a C630M, likely built for the Canadian National Railways. And Delaware Lackawanna 2461 is a C425, was built in the 1960s, used to serve on the British Columbia Railroad and before that the Erie-Lackawanna Railroad. And 1804 is an RS-11 that was built in 1956, used to serve on the Central Vermont Railway. Here's a recent acquisition, Delaware Lackawanna 959, the only EMD in their roster. This is a former Delaware Lackawanna and Western GP7. As you can see, it's toiled around on Conrail for a number of years. This is Delaware Lackawanna RS-32, number 211. This served down south in Tennessee and North Carolina during its stint as a locomotive, but it was originally built for the Southern Pacific. Used to haul high-speed piggyback zippers on the SP. And Delaware Lackawanna 2423 is a C425. Way back when, it was delivered and served on the Pennsylvania Railroad. And this is Tower Bridge 60. This is where the brains of the entire outfit for the Delaware Lackawanna is located. Quite an interesting fleet of locomotives. I don't know of many places you can find these type of locomotives, such variety, built by Alco. It's just a shame that they're all sitting here quiet and motionless. Recently, the Delaware Lackawanna built a new shop a little ways up on the Carbondale line. Don Colangelo is the master mechanic of the Delaware Lackawanna, and he does a superhuman job of keeping these engines in service.
Mile-long tunnel, that's the feature of the trip, so I hope everybody likes tunnels. 2.5 miles of woods, and the ride ends up at the baseball stadium. That's where the track ends. We'll turn the trolley car around and come back. It's about a 45-minute trip. Awesome. And the car you're riding on this afternoon, 90 years old. Wow. It was built back in 1931.
It's older than you, actually.
It ran in Philadelphia, in the western suburbs of the city. Did not run here in Scranton. And it's all electric, if you were wondering. It's 650 volts, direct current right above our heads, overhead wire. So the first pole's behind us, and the wire stretches 5 miles all the way up to the ballpark. Everything on this car is original to 1931 except the advertisement cards. These are reproductions. 1931, late 1960s would be about your time frame with everything. And other than that, though, you're back in 1931. The seats are very unusual. It's what we call pleather. Polyester and leather combined. It gives you that rich, luxurious look of leather. It's much more durable. Very popular in automobiles in the 1930s. If you had a car with pleather in it, you were living large. So trolley cars, some of them were getting pleather, and you're riding in the Cadillac of trolley cars this afternoon. So yep, it was a big deal to have pleather back then. But we're all set to go. Brian, if you'd like to close up the back doors, we're all here. And we are secure, everyone, so hang on to your nickels. With the famous trolley expression, that was the original fare on the trolley car, a nickel.
Back in the old days, you'd have a conductor who collects the fares and it's a driver. Go right by the campus, he'll point that out. He'll point out, you'll see a lot of things that you might have overlooked. He'll tell you a little bit more about Scranton than you thought possible. Well, he has to stop and Jimmy will flag the crossing. You'll see him go out, flag it, wave us through.
Oh, is this the way to go to like Alfredo?
I think it is, yeah. I used to point this out when we would, there he goes, he's gonna flag the crossing. I would always point this track out whenever we would be coming down to Alfredo. Don't want to leave them behind. Got one more.
Yeah. The building on your right was original to the Lackawanna Railroad. They built all the locomotives here in Scranton. Army ammunition plant. And still is today. There's a strong security here.
Yeah. Only one more. There's the campus over there. Radisson Hotel. A hotel that you love so much, Ashley, because they're comfortable beds, comfortable couches, right?
Well, the building on your left-hand side up above now, that's the Radisson Hotel today. But originally the Lackawanna Railroad's passenger station. The last train left there in 1970. You could go west to Buffalo, then on to Chicago, or east to Hoboken, New Jersey. That was our train to New York back in the day. It was called the Phoebe Snow.
Big cities. Phoebe Snow is discontinued in 66.
Roaring Brook is on your right. And then left-hand side, University of Scranton. That's their campus right across the skyline.
Way up there. Where are your classrooms? Any classrooms there, Ashley?
No, this is the science. The health department stuff.
The freight cars are covered up and they bring freight cars. They switch down here at night. Trolley's not running there.
Now we'll pass through a rail yard directly in front of us. We share our track with the local railroad, but when the trolley car runs, we're it. No trains can run out here when we're operating. The rail cars we're going to pass on the left are called covered hopper cars. Covered hoppers. So later on we'll show you where the train takes these covered hoppers. on was called the Laura Line. Originally ran between Scranton and Wilkes-Barre, 19 miles third-way electric. We're going to travel on the only remaining 3 miles of that original 19. Now coming up here on the left, you're going to see iron gates against the side of the hill. Right here. This once was an entrance to a working anthracite coal mine. That's where the men used to enter. That's a very old mine that closed in 1900. The railroad we're traveling on, the Laura Line, built here in 1903. And you have to remember this was our #1 industry, one of the richest coal fields in the world. At one point we supplied 75% of all the anthracite coal for the entire world from this region. It's called the Northern Field. And our last operating coal mine closed here in 1967. So we do not mine anthracite coal here anymore. Today that coal mine is the Lackawanna County Coal Mine Tour. If you ever get a chance to take that, I highly recommend it. You get to go 300 feet underground into the coal mines and actually see how the men mined coal back in the day.
Twice.
We're going to head up now to the Stepped Falls, right around the corner.
No, that's not the one we went to. It's way out of town. Yeah, here. Look up the brook up there, you see waterfalls.
Again on your left, a beautiful view. Now this is the Gorge area of Scranton. And the very first thing you're seeing is Roaring Brook underneath of us. And continue looking upstream, the waterfall. That's called the Stepped Falls. It's a 3-story man-made waterfall. It was built to harness Roaring Brook. If you're familiar with Scranton, Naog Park is up above that waterfall. And then the bridge in the foreground, that's the brand new Harrison Avenue Bridge. That span just opened a couple years ago. That replaced a 1906 concrete structure that once stood there. So again, beautiful section of the city, the Gorge area of Scranton. Directly in front of us, our tunnel. The tunnel is a mile long, 116 years old this year, and it runs directly under Crown Avenue. So here we go, into the tunnel.
Neatest part of the trip right here. Granddaughter's not really a rail buff, but she's enjoying this ride. literally and figuratively cool.
Now we're going to leave the city of Scranton. We're heading towards Montage Mountain. The neighborhood on your right is the Dutch Hollow section, South Scranton.
You get a different perspective of the city from down here.
St. Mary's Cemetery will be on your right on the hillside. We'll pass directly underneath Interstate 81 now, the Twin Bridges. And the next 2.5 miles, all woods. So the interstate will be on your right all the way out. Montage Mountain now on your left. We'll travel right along the base of the mountain, our wildlife nature part of the ride.
Believe it or not, this car we're riding on has a capability of going 70 miles an hour. It's the fastest car in their fleet. They're both Red Arrow trolleys from Philadelphia. Montage Mountain. No steering wheel on these trolleys.
Now we're going through what we call a passing siding. There's a track right alongside of us on our right. And as we continue, also on our right, 2 more tracks on the hillside. A lower track and an upper track. And that's where the train takes the covered hopper cars. He goes up the low track to the switch and reverses to the top. And the switch up on that hill is called a switchback. And the switchback means you're exactly what you're saying. You're switching back to another track. Just a clever way to climb a hill. Railroads never go straight up a mountain. They layer the side of the hill with tracks. So we don't go up there with the train. That's just for the trolley cars. That goes to the Manuka section, South Scranton.
There are bears in here.
Montage Mountain Road. Interstate 81 on your right, Davis Street. And one more crossing we're going to go over, Glenmar. Glenmar has gates, lights, and bells.
And they're outrunning us. Like 3 o'clock. They're gone. I don't know if you saw them. But I did. I got them. I'm gonna blow his whistle up here.
And directly in front of us, PNC Field, the home of the Scranton Wilkes-Barre Rail Riders, the New York Yankees AAA affiliate. And the building that will be directly in front of us, that's our trolley restoration shop. We restore and repair all our trolley cars in there. And of course, this is the end of the line. So once we get stopped, we're going to turn the car around to head back, and I'll explain that to you once we're stopped.
This is the end of the line. Yeah, during the summer, they're going to run trolley excursions to the ballpark. You can buy it. Oh, they just switch the poles, and he goes sits in the other end.
So this is the end of the line, everybody. And once we get stopped, our motorman has to get off the car. He has to switch the poles on the roof. There's a rear pole and a front pole. And then he'll grab his control handles from this end. He'll go to that end. So in essence, the back is the front and the front is the back. It all depends on which direction you're traveling. So for all of you, you have the easy part. If you don't want to ride backwards, of course, if you do, you certainly can. Well, you simply stand up. Only the back of the seat is hinged, and this is a handle, and it simply goes over like that.
Enjoyed the trip. She's never seen flip over seats before. How about that, huh? She's used to all the fixed seats that the Long Island Railroad has, the Metro North has, and SEPTA has. Cool, huh?